$25,000 in fines. That's what this certified letter demanded from my mailbox, signed by HOA President Linda Marsh. The problem? My house was built 15 years before her HOA even existed. I called Linda expecting a simple mistake correction, but she coldly told me everyone in Meadowbrook pays and threatened to take legal action. That's when I realized this wasn't a billing error, it was a shakedown. But Linda had no idea she just picked a fight with a retired Army veteran who was about to become her worst nightmare. While she was busy threatening me with fake fines, I was secretly planning something that would give me the ultimate power over her precious HOA. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment, because this revenge story gets absolutely wild. And if you believe no HOA Karen should ever get away with extorting innocent homeowners, hit subscribe, because justice is about to be served with receipts. I was fixing a loose outlet in my kitchen when I heard the mail truck pull away. Nothing unusual about that. Same driver, same time, same route for the past 3 years. But when I walked out to grab the mail, there was something different sitting in my box. A certified letter, the kind that makes your stomach drop before you even open it. The return address read, Meadowbrook Homeowners Association, in fancy script letters. I stared at it for a moment, confused. I'd lived at 847 Oak Street for 36 years, since I bought the place fresh out of the Army in 1987. Never once had I received anything from an HOA. Hell, I didn't even know we had one. I tore open the envelope and pulled out a 3-page document that looked official enough to fool most people. Notice of accumulated violations and demand for payment was printed in bold letters across the top. Below that, in smaller text, it listed my name, address, and a breakdown of fines that made my blood pressure spike. Unauthorized exterior paint color, $500. Unapproved mailbox design, $750. Non-compliant landscaping, $1,200. Failure to obtain approval for driveway repairs, $20,000. The list went on and on, dating back 5 years. At the bottom, in red ink, was the total, $25,000. $25,000. For painting my house the same blue it had been since 1987. For replacing my mailbox after some drunk teenager took it out with his pickup truck. For trimming my hedges and fixing the cracks in my driveway, normal homeowner stuff that I'd been doing for decades without anyone's permission. The letter was signed by Linda Marsh, HOA President, with a phone number and a demand that payment be made within 30 days to avoid further legal action. There was also a clause about liens and foreclosure proceedings that would have scared the hell out of most people. But here's the thing, I'm not most people. 30 years as a licensed electrical contractor teaches you to read the fine print and check your facts before you panic. And something about this whole situation stunk worse than week-old fish. I walked back into my house and pulled out the metal filing cabinet where I keep all my important documents, birth certificate, discharge papers, social security card, and right there in the front, my original deed from 1987. I spread it out on my kitchen table and read through the property description, the lot lines, and the legal language that proved I owned every square inch of my quarter-acre plot. The deed was crystal clear. No mention of any homeowners association. No covenants, conditions, or restrictions. Just a straightforward property transfer from the previous owner to me, witnessed by a notary and recorded at the county courthouse on March 15, 1987. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number on the letter. It rang 3 times before a woman answered with a voice that could cut glass. Meadowbrook HOA, Linda Marsh speaking. Miss Marsh, this is Dave Richardson at 847 Oak Street. I just received your letter about $25,000 in fines. Yes, Mr. Richardson. Your violations have been accumulating for quite some time. The board has been very patient, but we can't continue to overlook your non-compliance with community standards. I kept my voice level, the way they taught us in the Army when dealing with difficult situations. Ma'am, I think there's been some kind of mistake. My property was built in 1987, and I've never been part of any homeowners association." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Linda's voice came back, colder than before. "Mr. Richardson, every property in Meadowbrook is subject to HOA rules and regulations. The association was established to maintain property values and ensure our community remains desirable." "When was your HOA established?" 2002. I felt something click into place. "Miss Marsh, if your HOA was established in 2002 and my house was built in 1987, how exactly does that work? You can't retroactively apply rules to properties that existed before your organization." Another pause, longer this time. When Linda spoke again, her fake sweetness was completely gone. "Mr. Richardson, I don't appreciate your tone. Every property owner in Meadowbrook pays their fair share. The boundaries of our association include your property, regardless of when your house was built. Show me the documentation." "Excuse me?" "Show me the legal documents that prove my property is part of your association. Show me where I agreed to any covenants or restrictions. Show me anything that gives you the authority to fine me for maintaining my own home." The silence stretched out for nearly 10 seconds. Then Linda's voice came back like a slap in the face. "Mr. Richardson, everyone in Meadowbrook pays. I suggest you consult with an attorney if you have questions about our authority. Payment is due within 30 days, or we will be forced to pursue legal remedies." The line went dead. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling something I hadn't experienced since my last deployment in Desert Storm. That cold, focused anger that comes when someone threatens you and yours. Linda Marsh had just made two critical mistakes. First, she'd threatened a man who'd spent 30 years navigating building codes, permit processes, and legal requirements in the construction industry. Second, she'd picked a fight with someone who had nothing but time on his hands and a deep hatred for bullies. I walked over to my computer and started researching. Within an hour, I'd found the Meadowbrook HOA incorporation documents filed with the state in 2002. I found their original bylaws and boundary maps. And most importantly, I found something that made me smile for the first time since opening that letter. The HOA's original boundaries, as filed in 2002, didn't include my property. In fact, they didn't include about 6 other properties on my side of the neighborhood either. All of us had been built before the HOA existed, and none of us had ever agreed to join. But somehow, Linda Marsh was demanding $25,000 from me anyway. I printed out everything I'd found and put it in a folder. Then I walked out to my mailbox and looked around at my quiet neighborhood. Oak trees lining the street, well-maintained lawns, kids' bicycles scattered on driveways. It looked the same as it had for decades. But something had changed. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about some power-hungry woman who thought she could intimidate people with fake authority and official-looking paperwork. She was counting on me being scared, confused, or too old to fight back. Linda Marsh had no idea what she'd just started. The next morning, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. Not just any walk, a contractor's walk. The kind where you pay attention to property lines, fence posts, and which houses look older than others. After 30 years in the electrical business, you develop an eye for these things. I started at the corner of Oak and Maple, walking slowly and taking mental notes. The newer houses were obvious. Vinyl siding, modern windows, those fake stone facades that builders love. But scattered throughout the development were houses like mine. Older brick construction, mature trees, established landscaping. Houses that had been here long before Linda Marsh decided to play neighborhood dictator. That's when I spotted Margaret Santos watering her flower garden at 823 Oak Street. I'd known Margaret for 15 years, ever since she moved in after her husband died. Sweet lady, retired nurse, kept to herself mostly, but always waved when she saw me working in the yard. "Morning, Margaret," I called out as I approached her fence. She looked up and smiled, but I could see something was bothering her. Dark circles under her eyes, The kind you get from losing sleep over worry. Oh, hello, Dave. Beautiful morning, isn't it? Sure, Island. That garden of yours is looking fantastic. Those roses are something else. Her smile faded a little. Thank you. I hope I can keep them much longer. That stopped me cold. What do you mean? Margaret glanced around nervously, then walked closer to the fence. Dave, did you get a letter from the HOA recently? I felt that familiar tightness in my chest. As a matter of fact, I did. $25,000 worth of bogus fines. You? $4,500. They say my garden violates their landscaping standards. Unapproved plants. Improper border materials. Failure to submit landscaping plans for approval. Her voice shook a little. Dave, I planted these roses in memory of my husband. They want me to tear them out and replant with their approved shrubs. Margaret, when did you join the HOA? I didn't. I never signed anything, but they sent me a packet when I moved in, saying all properties in Meadowbrook were automatically included. I pulled out my phone and showed her the boundary map I'd printed. Look at this. This is their original filing from 2002. Your property isn't included either. She stared at the map for a long moment. Then why are they demanding money from me? Because Linda Marsh thinks she can get away with it. We talked for another 10 minutes. Margaret told me about the phone calls, the threats about liens and foreclosure, the way Linda spoke to her like she was a child who couldn't understand simple instructions. By the time I left her house, I was angrier than I'd been in years, but I was also starting to see a pattern. I continued my walk and found Tom Bradley at 851 Oak Street, checking his mail with his prosthetic leg propped on his front steps. Tom was an Iraq veteran, lost his leg to an IED in 2005. Good man, quiet, minded his own business. We'd bonded over military stories and shared beers on his porch a few times. Hey Tom, how's it going? Oh, same old stuff. He gestured at a letter in his hand. Except for this garbage from the HOA. I didn't even have to ask. How much? $8,000. They say my wheelchair ramp is an eyesore and violates architectural guidelines. Want me to tear it out and build something that matches their approved designs. Tom's jaw was tight. Dave, I need that ramp. It's the only way I can get in and out of my house without help. When did you build it? 3 years ago, when I bought the place. Had it done by a licensed contractor, meets all ADA requirements, passed city inspection, but apparently that doesn't matter to Queen Linda. I spent the next hour walking through the neighborhood with Tom, and we found something interesting. Every house that looked pre-2002 had received a letter. Mrs. Chen at 839 Oak got hit for $12,000. Bob Martinez at 855 Oak owed $18,000 for his detached garage. Even old Mr. Peterson at 831 Oak, who was 84 and barely left his house, got fined $6,000 for having the wrong color mailbox. But here's what really got my attention. Every single one of these houses was outside the original HOA boundaries. And every single homeowner had the same story. They'd never joined the HOA, never signed any agreements, never attended any meetings, but somehow Linda Marsh had decided they owed thousands of dollars anyway. By the time I got home, I had a theory, but theories don't hold up in court. I needed proof. The next morning, I drove to the county courthouse. After 30 years pulling electrical permits, I knew my way around the building department and records office. I found Mary Sullivan, the clerk who'd helped me with permit research for years. Dave Richardson. Haven't seen you since you retired. What brings you down here? Hey, Mary. I need to look up some property records and HOA filings. Got a situation brewing in my neighborhood. Mary led me to the research terminals and showed me how to access the database. What I found over the next 3 hours made my blood boil. The original Meadowbrook HOA boundary map, filed in 2002, covered about 60 properties, all newer construction, all built after year 2000. But in 2008, someone had filed an amended boundary map that expanded the HOA territory to include an additional 47 properties, including mine, Margaret's, Tom's, and every other pre-2002 house that had received threatening letters. The filing was signed by Linda Marsh as HOA president. But here's the kicker. There was no documentation of homeowner approval for the boundary change. No meeting minutes, no votes, no signed agreements from the affected properties. Linda had simply expanded her kingdom with the stroke of a pen and hoped nobody would notice. I printed out everything and drove home, feeling like I'd just cracked a case. This wasn't just harassment or a billing mistake. This was fraud. Systematic, deliberate fraud targeting people Linda thought wouldn't fight back. I decided to file a formal complaint with the county. Surely, once the authorities saw the evidence, they'd put a stop to Linda's operation and force her to leave the legitimate property owners alone. I was still naive enough to think the system would work the way it was supposed to. 2 days after I filed my complaint, I was taking my evening walk when a sheriff's deputy pulled up alongside me. Deputy Martinez. I recognized him from around town. "Mr. Richardson, I need to speak with you about a complaint that was filed." My heart jumped. "About the HOA fraud? I'm glad you guys are taking it seriously." "No, sir. A complaint against you for trespassing and harassment." I stared at him. "What?" Linda Marsh filed a report saying you've been walking through the neighborhood, going onto people's property without permission, taking pictures of houses, and harassing residents about HOA business. She says you've been intimidating elderly neighbors and threatening legal action. I felt the world tilt a little bit. "Deputy, I've been walking in my own neighborhood for 36 years. I talk to my neighbors because we're trying to figure out why we're being hit with bogus fines. Ma'am says you came onto her property yesterday and verbally threatened her. I've never set foot on Linda Marsh's property. I don't even know where she lives." Deputy Martinez looked uncomfortable. "Look, Mr. Richardson, I'm not saying I believe her story, but I have to follow up on complaints. Maybe just stick to your own street for a while, okay? Let things cool down." After he left, I sat on my porch for a long time, watching the sun go down. Linda Marsh had just played a card I hadn't expected. She wasn't just stealing money from people. She was using the police as her personal enforcers. And she'd made it clear that anyone who fought back would face consequences. But what Linda didn't know was that she'd just escalated this conflict in a way that was about to backfire spectacularly. Because now, she wasn't just stealing from me and my neighbors. She was abusing the system itself. And I was about to show her what happened when you corner a man with nothing left to lose. 3 weeks after the deputy's visit, I was sitting in my truck outside the Meadowbrook Community Center, watching Linda Marsh unlock the door for what I'd learned was her monthly HOA board meeting. I'd been doing my homework, and it was time to get some answers directly from the source. I waited until she was alone, then walked up to the building. Through the window, I could see her setting up folding chairs and arranging papers on a table. I knocked on the glass door. She looked up with that fake smile plastered on her face, until she recognized me. Then her expression went cold as winter. "Mr. Richardson, I thought I made it clear that harassment wouldn't be tolerated." "Ma'am, I just want to understand how your association works. Seems like there might be some confusion about property boundaries." She opened the door but didn't invite me in. "There's no confusion. Every property in Meadowbrook is subject to HOA oversight. That includes yours." I pulled out my phone and hit record, keeping it low by my side where she couldn't see it. "But my house was built 15 years before your HOA existed. How does that work exactly?" Linda's voice took on that condescending tone people use when they think you're stupid. "Mr. Richardson, when we expanded our boundaries in 2018, we included all properties that benefit from our community standards and services. Your property values have increased because of our efforts. It's only fair that you contribute to the association. So you expanded the boundaries to include properties that never agreed to join? We expanded the boundaries to increase revenue and ensure proper oversight of the entire neighborhood." She paused, realizing what she'd just said. "I mean, to maintain community standards." Bingo. I had her admitting on tape that boundary expansion was about money, not community standards. And what gives you the legal authority to do that? The HOA has full authority to manage community affairs as we see fit. If you have problems with that, you can take it up with your lawyer. She slammed the door in my face, but I already had what I came for. Over the next few weeks, I started reaching out to more neighbors. What I found was even worse than I'd imagined. Margaret Santos wasn't just being harassed about her garden. Linda was demanding she replant everything with approved shrubs that would cost $8,000. Tom Bradley's wheelchair ramp wasn't just an eyesore. Linda wanted him to rebuild it with expensive materials that would match the newer houses. But the story that really got to me came from Mrs. Chen, the widow at 839 Oak Street. She was 82, living on Social Security and her late husband's small pension. Linda had fined her $12,000 for having the wrong color front door and demanded she hire an approved contractor to repaint it with HOA-specified paint that cost $200 per gallon. Mr. Dave, Mrs. Chen told me in her broken English, I save for 6 months to buy paint at Home Depot. $30. She say no good, must use special paint. I no have money for special paint. That's when I realized Linda wasn't just power hungry. She was targeting the most vulnerable people in the neighborhood, elderly folks, disabled veterans, widows on fixed incomes, because she figured they'd be too scared or too poor to fight back. I spent the next month documenting everything. I drove to the courthouse twice more and found something interesting in the public records. When HOAs expand their boundaries, they're supposed to file amended articles of incorporation with the state. They're supposed to hold public hearings. They're supposed to get approval from affected property owners. Linda Marsh had done none of those things. She'd simply drawn new lines on a map and started sending out bills. But I needed more than property records to stop her. I needed political power. That's when I saw the notice in the local newspaper about upcoming elections for county commissioner. The incumbent, Bill Hendricks, had held the seat for 16 years and was running unopposed. County commissioners oversee things like zoning, building codes, and yes, HOA oversight. I'd never run for office in my life, never even thought about it. But as I read through the requirements, I realized I was actually qualified. You needed to be a registered voter, have lived in the county for at least 2 years, and file your candidacy papers before the deadline. The deadline was in 3 days. I called my old buddy Jake Morrison, who'd worked construction with me for 10 years before starting his own landscaping business. Jake knew everybody in town and had a mouth bigger than the Grand Canyon. Dave, you want to run for what now? County commissioner. Jake, listen to me. There's this HOA president who's scamming people out of thousands of dollars, targeting elderly folks and veterans with fake fines. The only way to stop her is to get authority over HOA oversight. You realize you'd have to campaign, right? Knock on doors, kiss babies, make speeches. I realize I'd have the power to investigate fraudulent HOAs and shut down their operations. Jake was quiet for a moment. You know what? Bill Hendricks hasn't done a damn thing for working people in 16 years. Maybe it's time for a change. Count me in. Within 48 hours, Jake had rounded up 12 volunteers from the VFW, the local electricians union, and 3 neighborhood watch groups. We filed my candidacy papers with 20 minutes to spare before the deadline. Linda Marsh found out about my campaign 3 days later. I was putting up my first campaign sign in my front yard when a black sedan pulled up to the curb. Linda got out wearing a business suit and sunglasses like she was some kind of federal agent. Mr. Richardson, I hear you're running for county commissioner. That's right. Someone needs to provide oversight for out-of-control HOAs. I think you'll find that political campaigns can be very expensive. Lots of regulations, lots of paperwork, easy to make mistakes that could get you disqualified. I straightened up and looked her in the eye. Is that a threat? It's friendly advice. This county needs experienced leadership, not bitter old men with personal grudges. Well, I guess we'll let the voters decide. She got back in her car, but before driving away, She rolled down the window. "Dave, you have no idea what you're getting yourself into." That night, I installed 2 security cameras on my front porch. Call it paranoia, but 30 years in construction teaches you that when someone threatens you, they usually follow through. 2 weeks into my campaign, I was proven right. I woke up at 3 in the morning to the sound of my truck alarm going off. I grabbed my flashlight and ran outside to find all 4 of my campaign signs destroyed. Not just knocked over, completely trashed, with what looked like tire marks running right through the middle of them. But Linda had made a mistake. My security cameras had caught everything, including a clear shot of her license plate as she drove away. The next morning, I took the footage to Deputy Martinez. He watched the video twice, shook his head, and told me he'd file a report for vandalism and destruction of property. "But Dave, between you and me, this is just going to escalate things." "Good," I said. "Let her escalate. The more desperate she gets, the more mistakes she'll make." What I didn't tell Deputy Martinez was that I was counting on Linda getting desperate. Because desperate people do stupid things, and stupid things leave evidence. And I was about to collect enough evidence to bury her for good. The breakthrough came 3 weeks before Election Day, and it came from an unlikely source: the county clerk's office. I'd filed a Freedom of Information Act request for all documents related to HOA boundary changes in Meadowbrook, expecting the usual bureaucratic runaround. Instead, Mary Sullivan called me personally. "Dave, you need to get down here and see this, and bring a camera." I drove to the courthouse, thinking Mary had found some additional paperwork that might help my case. What she showed me was so much better than that. Remember that boundary expansion Linda filed in 2018? Mary spread out 2 copies of the same document on the counter. "Look at these closely and tell me what you see." The first copy was what I'd seen before: Linda's amended boundary map expanding the HOA territory to include my property and 46 others. But the second copy looked different somehow. Same content, same signatures, but something was off. "The paper's different," I said after studying them for a minute. "That's right. This one," she pointed to the first copy, "was printed on standard office paper, probably from someone's home printer. But this one was printed on official county letterhead, the kind we only started using in 2020. I stared at the documents. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying someone backdated this filing. The version in our official records shows a 2018 date, but it was printed on paper that didn't exist until 2020. And look at the ink." She handed me a magnifying glass. Under magnification, I could see that the ink on the official version had a slightly different color and consistency than the ink on the original filing. "Mary, this is fraud." "Dave, this is evidence. And there's more." She pulled out a third document: the original HOA incorporation papers from 2002. "Look at Linda Marsh's signature on the 2002 filing. Then compare it to her signature on the 2018 boundary expansion." I held the documents side by side. Even to my untrained eye, the signatures looked completely different. The 2002 signature was neat and controlled. The 2018 signature was hurried, shaky, like someone trying to copy handwriting they'd only seen a few times. She didn't sign the original incorporation papers, did she? Nope. Linda Marsh didn't become HOA president until 2016. Someone else signed those 2018 documents using her name. I took pictures of everything with my phone, making sure to capture the paper differences and ink variations. This was the smoking gun I'd been looking for, but I knew Linda wouldn't go down without a fight. My campaign had been picking up steam over the past month. The VFW endorsed me after I spoke at their monthly meeting about Linda's harassment of Tom Bradley and other veterans. The local seniors group backed me after Margaret Santos told them about the threats to tear out her memorial garden. Even some of the newer Meadowbrook residents were starting to ask questions about why their HOA fees kept going up while their services stayed the same. But Linda wasn't sitting idle. She'd been making calls, pulling strings, trying to undermine my candidacy any way she could. 2 weeks earlier, she'd filed a complaint with the county election board, claiming I was running a hate campaign against HOAs. The board dismissed it after reviewing my actual campaign materials, but it cost me 3 days of campaigning while I dealt with the bureaucracy. Then she tried to get me disqualified by claiming I'd violated campaign finance laws. That one was easier to handle. Jake Morrison had been tracking every dollar we spent, and our total campaign budget was less than $800. Hard to violate finance laws when you're running your campaign on pocket change and volunteer labor. But her latest move caught me completely off guard. I was at home Friday evening, preparing for a campaign event at the community center, when there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find a sheriff's deputy I didn't recognize, holding an official-looking document. "David Richardson? That's me. You're being served with a restraining order. You need to stay at least 500 feet away from Linda Marsh and her property at all times." I took the papers and read through them while the deputy waited. According to the filing, I had repeatedly threatened and harassed Linda Marsh, including following her to her home, taking pictures of her property, and making verbal threats about destroying her life and ruining her reputation. "Deputy, none of this is true. I've never even been to her house. I don't know where she lives." "Sir, that's something you'll need to work out with the court. The restraining order is effective immediately." After he left, I called Rebecca Chen, the civil rights attorney who'd started helping me with legal research after hearing about the HOA fraud. Rebecca had handled cases like this before, and she was furious when I read her the restraining order over the phone. "Dave, this is complete garbage. Every single allegation can be disproven with time-stamped evidence. But here's the problem. She filed this 3 weeks before the election, which means you'll have to spend time and money fighting it instead of campaigning." "How much time and money?" "If we move fast, we can get a hearing scheduled for next Tuesday. I'll need affidavits from witnesses who can verify your whereabouts during the time she claims you were harassing her. And Dave, this is going to cost you about $8,000 in legal fees." $8,000. That was almost exactly what I had in my savings account. Linda had calculated this perfectly. Even if I won, even if the restraining order was thrown out, I'd be financially crippled right before the election. But Linda had made one crucial mistake. She'd picked a fight with someone who'd spent 30 years dealing with contractors, suppliers, and clients who tried to cheat him. And over those 30 years, I'd learned that the best defense against people who abuse the system is to use the system better than they do. I spent the weekend collecting evidence. Tom Bradley provided an affidavit stating that I was at his house during one of the times Linda claimed I was harassing her. Margaret Santos confirmed I was helping her with a broken electrical outlet during another alleged incident. Jake Morrison had photographs from campaign events that proved I was at public meetings when Linda said I was stalking her. But the best evidence came from my own security cameras. I'd installed them after Linda vandalized my campaign signs, and they'd been recording everything. The timestamps showed exactly where I was and when, providing an ironclad alibi for every single accusation in the restraining order. Rebecca presented our evidence to the court Tuesday morning, and the hearing lasted exactly 23 minutes. The judge took one look at the security footage, compared it to Linda's sworn statements, and dismissed the restraining order with prejudice. "Miss Marsh," the judge said, "filing false statements under oath is perjury, which is a felony. I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation. Mr. Richardson, I apologize for the court's time being wasted with this frivolous action." Rebecca's legal fees came to exactly $8,000, just as she'd predicted. But as I wrote the check, I realized something important. Linda hadn't just failed to stop my campaign. She'd handed me the perfect campaign issue. A woman who would lie under oath to silence her political opponents was exactly the kind of person who would forge documents to steal money from elderly neighbors. Election day was 12 days away, and Linda Marsh had just made herself the poster child for everything that was wrong with unchecked authority. The irony was perfect. In trying to destroy my campaign, She'd made it impossible for me to lose. Election night arrived with a thunderstorm that knocked out power to half the county. But the voting machines at Meadowbrook Elementary kept running on backup generators. I spent the day doing what every candidate does, driving around to polling stations, shaking hands, and pretending I wasn't nervous as hell. Jake Morrison had been tracking voter turnout all day, calling our volunteers at each location every 2 hours. By 4 o'clock, he was grinning like a man who'd just won the lottery. "Dave, I've never seen anything like this. Turnout in Meadowbrook Precinct is 3 times higher than normal. The election workers are saying people are specifically asking for ballots to vote against Bill Hendricks. What about the other precincts?" Same story. Margaret Santos has been working the phones all week, telling every senior citizen in the county about Linda's threats to tear out Memorial Gardens. Tom Bradley got the veterans groups fired up about HOA harassment of disabled vets. Even some of Linda's own neighbors are voting against the status quo. At 8 o'clock, I was at the community center with about 40 supporters, watching the returns come in on Jake's laptop. The first results showed me ahead 58 to 42%, but those were just the early mail-in ballots. The real test would be the precinct-by-precinct results. Meadowbrook came in first. Dave Richardson, 73%. Bill Hendricks, 27%. The room erupted in cheers, but I kept my celebration quiet. Meadowbrook was friendly territory. I needed to win county-wide. Oak Grove Precinct, where a lot of county employees lived. Richardson, 61%. Pine Valley, the retirement community where Margaret had been campaigning. Richardson, 78%. Riverside, the working-class neighborhood where Jake had organized the electricians' union. Richardson, 64%. By 9:30, with 80% of precincts reporting, I was ahead by 18 points. Bill Hendricks, the 16-year incumbent who'd run unopposed in the last 3 elections, was getting demolished by a retired electrician who'd never held political office. At 10:15, Rebecca Chen walked into the community center and found me standing in the corner, still not quite believing what was happening. "Congratulations, Commissioner Richardson. You just pulled off the biggest upset in county history." "Rebecca, I need to ask you something. As county commissioner, what kind of authority do I have over HOAs?" "More than you might think. You'll have oversight authority for any HOA that operates within county jurisdiction. You can investigate complaints, subpoena financial records, and recommend prosecution for fraudulent activities." "Why?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the recording I'd made of Linda admitting she expanded HOA boundaries to increase revenue. "Because I've got about 47,000 reasons to launch an investigation." Rebecca listened to the recording twice, then looked up at me with something like awe in her eyes. "Dave, do you realize what you've just done? You've created a legal pathway to go after every fraudulent HOA operation in the county." The victory party broke up around 11, but I stayed behind to help clean up the community center. As I was stacking folding chairs, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around to find Linda Marsh standing in the doorway. She looked different than I'd ever seen her. The fake smile was gone, replaced by something that might have been genuine emotion. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. "Congratulations, Dave. I guess the voters have spoken." "Thank you, Linda. I appreciate that." She walked closer, and I could see she was struggling with something. "I suppose you'll be coming after the HOA now." "I'll be investigating any complaints about HOA misconduct. If everything's legitimate, you have nothing to worry about." Linda laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You and I both know everything's not legitimate." For just a moment, her mask slipped completely. I saw exhaustion, fear, and something that might have been regret. Then she pulled herself together and became the Linda Marsh I knew. "Well, I suppose I should congratulate you properly." She extended her hand, and I shook it. Her grip was firm, but her hand was trembling slightly. After she left, I sat in the empty community center for another hour, thinking about what came next. I'd won the election, but that was just the beginning. Tomorrow I'd start the transition process. In 6 weeks, I'd be sworn in as county commissioner. And then the real work would begin. My first official meeting was scheduled for the second Tuesday in January. I'd already planned the agenda. Item 1. Establish new oversight procedures for homeowners associations. Item 2. Investigate complaints of fraudulent boundary expansion and unauthorized fee collection. Item 3. Require all HOAs to submit annual financial audits. But first, I wanted to hear from the victims. 3 weeks after the election, I held a public forum at the high school auditorium. The purpose was simple: give people a chance to tell their HOA horror stories on the record, with a court reporter taking down every word. Margaret Santos was the first to speak. She walked to the microphone carrying a photo of her husband in his army uniform, the same picture that sat next to her memorial garden. My name is Margaret Santos, and I live at 823 Oak Street. For 3 years, Linda Marsh has threatened to fine me thousands of dollars for maintaining a garden in memory of my late husband. She calls it non-compliant landscaping. I call it love. The applause was thunderous. Tom Bradley spoke next, his prosthetic leg clicking slightly as he approached the microphone. My name is Tom Bradley. I lost my leg fighting for this country in Iraq. Linda Marsh says, my wheelchair ramp is an eyesore. I say it's the only way I can get into my own home. More applause, longer this time. For 2 hours, neighbors told stories of harassment, intimidation, and financial extortion. Mrs. Chen, speaking through her daughter as translator, described being fined for having the wrong color front door. Bob Martinez explained how he was charged $18,000 for a garage he'd built with proper permits 15 years earlier. But the most damaging testimony came from Janet Walsh, one of Linda's own board members. My name is Janet Walsh, and I've served on the Meadowbrook HOA board for 4 years. I'm here tonight to tell you that everything Dave Richardson has said about boundary expansion and unauthorized fees is true. Linda Marsh has been systematically targeting non-member properties for revenue generation. She told the board it was our duty to expand our territory to increase income. The room went dead quiet. Last month, she instructed me to prepare liens against properties that never agreed to join the HOA. When I asked about the legal authority, she said, "Who's going to stop us?" Well, now I know the answer to that question. By the end of the evening, I had statements from 17 people documenting a clear pattern of fraud, extortion, and abuse of authority. More importantly, I had Janet Walsh's testimony that Linda had ordered illegal liens against non-member properties. The next morning, I called the district attorney's office and requested a meeting. It was time to turn my evidence over to someone who could file criminal charges. As I sat in my truck outside the courthouse, I thought about how this all started. 4 months ago, I was just a retired electrician who got a bogus bill in the mail. Now I was the county commissioner-elect with enough evidence to put Linda Marsh in prison. Sometimes the system works exactly the way it's supposed to. Sometimes the good guys actually win. But I wasn't celebrating yet. Linda Marsh was cornered, desperate, and facing the possibility of criminal charges. In my experience, that's when people become most dangerous. And I was about to find out just how dangerous Linda could be. The call came at 6:30 in the morning, 3 days before I was supposed to be sworn in as county commissioner. Janet Walsh was whispering into the phone, like she was afraid someone might overhear her. "Dave, Linda's lost it. She called an emergency board meeting for tonight. She's talking about dissolving the HOA and destroying all the financial records before you take office." I was instantly awake. "Where's the meeting?" "The community center, 7 o'clock. "But Dave," she specifically said, "board members only. No residents, no public access. And she told us to bring any HOA documents we have at home." "Janet, are you sure about this?" She spent 20 minutes on the phone yesterday, ranting about how you and your conspiracy of malcontents are trying to destroy everything she's built. She kept saying, the only way to protect the association is to start fresh with clean records. After I hung up, I called Rebecca Chen, Destroying HOA records while under investigation wasn't just suspicious, it was obstruction of justice, which carried serious criminal penalties. Dave, if she's really planning to destroy evidence, we need to catch her in the act. But it has to be done legally. What do you mean? I mean, you can't just show up and start taking pictures. But if someone were to anonymously tip the sheriff's department about suspicious activity at the community center, they'd have to investigate. I understood. And if a county commissioner-elect happened to be in the area when the sheriff arrived, that would just be a coincidence. Exactly. At 6:45 that evening, I parked across the street from the community center and watched Linda's car pull into the lot. Steve Kumar arrived 5 minutes later, followed by 2 other board members I recognized from neighborhood meetings. Janet Walsh was the last to arrive, and I could see her glancing around nervously as she walked to the building. I waited 15 minutes, then called the sheriff's non-emergency line. Sheriff's Department, how can I help you? I'd like to report suspicious activity at the Meadowbrook Community Center. There's smoke coming from behind the building, and it looks like someone might be burning documents in the parking lot. Sir, are you sure about the smoke? I looked toward the building and saw a thin gray line rising from behind the dumpsters. Yes, ma'am, I'm sure. We'll send a deputy to check it out. 20 minutes later, Deputy Martinez pulled into the community center parking lot. I got out of my truck and walked over, making sure to stay on the public sidewalk. Evening, deputy. Everything okay here? Got a call about suspicious burning. You see anything unusual? Before I could answer, we both heard raised voices coming from inside the building. Then Linda's voice, louder than the others. I don't care what you think. These records belong to the HOA, and I'll decide what happens to them. Deputy Martinez looked at me, then at the building. Mr. Richardson, I'm going to need you to stay back while I investigate this. Of course, deputy. He walked to the front door of the community center and knocked. The voices inside went silent. A moment later, Linda opened the door with that fake smile plastered on her face. Officer, how can I help you? Ma'am, we received a report of suspicious burning on the premises. Mind if I take a look around? There's no burning here. We're just having a routine board meeting. But as she spoke, a gust of wind carried the smell of smoke around the building. Deputy Martinez noticed it too. Ma'am, I'm detecting smoke. I need to check the premises for safety purposes. Linda's smile faltered. Officer, this is private property. Don't you need a warrant? Not for a safety inspection, ma'am. Please, step aside. Deputy Martinez walked around the building toward the source of the smoke, with Linda trailing behind him making excuses. I stayed on the sidewalk, but I had a clear view of the parking lot behind the community center. What I saw made my jaw drop. There was a metal trash barrel next to the dumpster, with flames visible inside. Scattered around the barrel were dozens of file folders, bank statements, and official-looking documents. Steve Kumar was standing next to the barrel holding more papers, looking like a deer caught in headlights. Sir, step away from the barrel, Deputy Martinez ordered. Steve dropped the papers and took 3 steps back. Officer, we're just doing some spring cleaning. Getting rid of old paperwork that's cluttering up the office. Deputy Martinez walked over to the barrel and peered inside. Then he looked at the papers scattered on the ground. Even from the sidewalk, I could see bank statements and financial records with the Meadowbrook HOA letterhead. Ma'am, he called to Linda, you're burning official HOA records? Just old copies. Duplicates. We keep everything on computer now. But as Deputy Martinez bent down to examine the scattered papers, Janet Walsh came around the corner of the building. She was carrying a digital recorder in her hand, and her face was pale but determined. Officer, I need to report a crime. Linda spun around to stare at her. Janet, what are you doing? I'm reporting document destruction and fraud. Janet held up the recorder. I have evidence of Linda Marsh ordering the destruction of financial records while under investigation for embezzlement. Janet, you can't. Linda told us tonight that Dave Richardson's investigation would expose what she called irregularities in the HOA finances. She ordered us to burn anything that might be misinterpreted by outsiders. Janet pressed play on the recorder. Linda's voice came out crystal clear. "These idiots deserve to pay for living in our neighborhood. I earned that money managing their affairs, and no washed-up electrician is going to take it away from me. We burn everything tonight and start fresh tomorrow." The silence that followed was deafening. Linda stared at Janet with a look of pure hatred, while Steve Kumar just stood there with his mouth hanging open. Deputy Martinez looked at the burning barrel, the scattered documents, and the recorder in Janet's hand. Then he pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, I need backup at the Meadowbrook Community Center. I've got suspected document destruction and possible fraud. And send the fire department to put out this barrel." "Linda Marsh," he continued, "you're under arrest for destruction of evidence and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent." As Deputy Martinez handcuffed Linda, she looked directly at me and screamed, "This is all your fault! You've ruined everything!" "Ma'am, please calm down. 30 years I've lived in this neighborhood. 30 years I've worked to maintain property values and community standards. And this man destroys it all because he doesn't want to pay his fair share." Deputy Martinez guided her toward his patrol car, but Linda wasn't finished. "You think you've won? You think arresting me solves anything? There are HOAs all over this county doing exactly what I did, and they're going to keep doing it because people like you are too lazy to fight." The patrol car door slammed shut, cutting off her rant. But even through the glass, I could see her still screaming. Steve Kumar walked over to me as the fire department arrived to extinguish the barrel. "Dave, I'm sorry. I should have stopped this months ago. I knew what she was doing was wrong, but I was afraid of her." "Steve, what exactly was she doing?" "Skimming money from the HOA accounts. Every time someone paid a fine or fee, she'd take a percentage for what she called administrative costs. Last year alone, she took almost $50,000. I looked at the charred remains of financial records scattered around the parking lot, and she thought burning the evidence would make it all go away. She said banks only keep records for 7 years, and most of the theft happened in the last 3 years. Without the HOA records, no one could prove how much money was supposed to be in the accounts." Steve was wrong about one thing, though. Banks keep electronic records forever, and the district attorney would have no trouble reconstructing every fraudulent transaction Linda had made. As I watched the patrol car disappear into the night, I realized that Linda Marsh had just handed me the perfect ending to this story. She hadn't just been caught destroying evidence. She'd been caught on tape, confessing to years of theft and fraud. Tomorrow, I'd be sworn in as county commissioner, and my first official act would be ordering a complete audit of every HOA in the county. Linda Marsh's reign of terror was over, but the real work was just beginning. My swearing-in ceremony was held on a cold Tuesday morning in January. With about 50 people packed into the county commission meeting room, Margaret Santos sat in the front row wearing a navy blue dress and her husband's army pin. Tom Bradley was there in his dress uniform, and even Mrs. Chen had come with her daughter to translate. But the person I was most surprised to see was Linda Marsh. She sat in the back corner, wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, flanked by 2 bailiffs. Her attorney had requested permission for her to attend the ceremony, claiming she wanted to witness the peaceful transfer of power. More likely, she wanted one last chance to intimidate me. Judge Harrison administered the oath of office, and I placed my hand on the same Bible my wife had used when I married her 38 years ago. As I repeated the words about upholding the Constitution and serving the public trust, I could feel Linda's eyes burning into the back of my head. After the ceremony, people lined up to congratulate me and take pictures. Margaret gave me a hug and whispered, "My husband would have been so proud." Tom shook my hand and said, "Give her hell, Commissioner." As the crowd thinned out, Linda's attorney approached me. "Commissioner Richardson, my client would like a word with you." I looked over at Linda, still handcuffed, but trying to maintain some dignity in her jail uniform. 5 minutes. The bailiffs positioned themselves within earshot as I walked over to her corner. Up close, I could see that 3 weeks in county lockup had taken their toll. Her hair was unwashed, Her skin was pale, and there were dark circles under her eyes. "Congratulations, Dave. You got what you wanted." "Linda, all I ever wanted was for you to stop stealing money from my neighbors." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think this is about money? You think I went through all this trouble for a few $1,000s? The district attorney says you embezzled $47,000 over 3 years. $47,000 that I earned. Do you have any idea how much work it takes to manage a homeowners association? The phone calls, the meetings, the paperwork. I spent 60 hours a week making sure that neighborhood stayed beautiful, and what did I get for it? $100 monthly stipend and complaints from people who wouldn't know community standards if they bit them in the ass." I stared at her. "So you decided to pay yourself?" "I decided to take what I was worth. And you know what the really funny part is? Property values in Meadowbrook increased by 18% during my tenure as president. I made every homeowner in that neighborhood thousands of dollars richer, and they want to crucify me for taking a small administrative fee." "Small? You charged people for violations that didn't exist. You expanded HOA boundaries without authorization. You filed false police reports and perjured yourself in court." Linda's mask slipped, and for a moment I saw the real woman underneath all the fake authority and manufactured outrage. She looked tired, defeated, and somehow smaller than the person who'd threatened me 6 months ago. "Dave, I know what you think of me, but I want you to understand something. I'm not the villain in this story. I'm just a woman who tried to maintain standards in a world that doesn't care about standards anymore. By stealing money from elderly widows and disabled veterans, by making people pay for the benefits they received. Margaret Santos's property value went up $12,000 because of my landscaping standards. Tom Bradley's house is worth $8,000 more because I kept the neighborhood clean and safe. Mrs. Chen benefited from every rule I enforced, even if she didn't understand why they were necessary." The bailiff tapped his watch. "Time's up." As they led Linda away, she called back over her shoulder. "You won this round, Dave, but there are a dozen other Linda Marshes in this county, and they're not going to make the same mistakes I did." 2 weeks later, I got to put her prediction to the test. The county audit of Linda's finances took 3 months and confirmed everything we suspected. She'd systematically stolen money from HOA accounts, charging administrative fees that ranged from 15 to 30% of every fine collected. She'd also been double billing for maintenance work, pocketing the difference between what contractors charged and what she told homeowners the work cost. The total theft came to $68,000, not $47,000 as originally estimated. Judge Harrison sentenced her to 3 years in state prison and ordered full restitution to the victims. Linda would have to pay back every stolen dollar, plus $25,000 in penalties and court costs. Her house went up for sale the day after sentencing to cover the judgment. But the legal consequences were just the beginning. My first act as commissioner was to establish the Homeowners Association Oversight Board, with authority to investigate complaints, audit finances, and suspend HOA operations for cause. I designed the system using the same principles I'd learned in 30 years of electrical work: clear standards, regular inspections, and swift penalties for violations. Within 6 months, we'd received 43 complaints about HOA abuses across the county: fake boundary expansions, unauthorized fee collection, harassment of disabled residents. Linda hadn't been unique, just more brazen than most. The most satisfying case was Riverside Estates, where an HOA president named Gary Wilkins had been charging homeowners $300 for architectural review fees on projects that didn't require approval. He'd collected $18,000 over 2 years for reviewing paint jobs and mailbox replacements. When I showed up at his house with audit paperwork and a sheriff's deputy, Gary tried the same intimidation tactics Linda had used. "Commissioner, you don't understand how these communities work. There are standards to maintain." "Gary, there are also laws about theft and fraud. You can explain your standards to the judge." The oversight system worked so well that 3 other counties adopted similar programs. Within a year, I was getting calls from homeowners as far away as Oklahoma and Tennessee, asking for copies of our ordinances and enforcement procedures. But the real victory happened 6 months after Linda's sentencing, at a meeting of the remaining Meadowbrook HOA members. Margaret Santos stood up during the public comment period and made a motion. I move that we dissolve the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association entirely and replace it with a voluntary neighborhood watch program. The vote was unanimous. 42 homeowners decided they'd rather handle their own affairs than risk another Linda Marsh situation. Tom Bradley was elected coordinator of the new Neighborhood Watch, and his first act was to organize a community cleanup day. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to each other in years worked side by side, picking up litter and trimming common areas. Mrs. Chen brought homemade cookies for everyone. Margaret donated plants from her memorial garden for the pocket park at the corner of Oak and Maple. As I walked through the neighborhood that Saturday morning, watching people take care of their community without threats or fines or bureaucratic intimidation, I realized something important. Linda had been wrong about human nature. People don't need to be forced to maintain standards. They just need to be trusted to do the right thing. A year later, I was cleaning out my file cabinet when I found the original letter that started this whole mess. Notice of accumulated violations and demand for payment, $25,000. I stared at it for a long moment, then walked over to my kitchen wall, where I'd hung dozens of thank you letters from homeowners I'd helped across the county. Letters from people who'd gotten their stolen money back. Letters from disabled veterans who could keep their wheelchair ramps. Letters from elderly folks who didn't have to tear out memorial gardens. Real receipts from real people, proving that sometimes the system actually works the way it's supposed to. I folded up Linda's original threat and put it in my desk drawer. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that bullies only have as much power as you give them, and that the best way to fight fraud is with facts, patience, and the unshakable belief that right makes might. Linda Marsh had picked a fight with the wrong retired electrician, and in the end, justice got served with all the receipts anyone could ever want.